considering the implications of the national policy and use of freshwater bodies of the Waikato region. My name's Paul Taylor. I've been involved with the Waikato branch of the Royal Society for a while here now, and we are hosting this evening. So we have 5 panel members here who are going to answer your questions, but to start with, we're going to introduce each of them and they'll just give us a little rundown on their area of expertise. So we have Bryce Cooper in the far chair, David Hamilton, Alison Dewes, Bill Vant and Mike Scarsbrook. So to get the ball rolling, I'll ask Bryce to give us a rundown on his area of expertise. Bryce is General Manager Strategy at NIWA, and he's here in Hamilton. He has expertise in land use effects on water quality and the role of riparian zones. Bryce is currently Chair of the Technical Leaders Group advising healthy rivers for the Waiora project for the Waikato and Waipa catchments. So, Bryce would speak to us.
Can we come up here?
Indeed.
Thanks, Paul. And as I understand this evening, we're just supposed to spend 5 minutes each, so that we can then get some discussion going. So, for me, I kind of lack a lot of current expertise, so I'll leave that to these other panel members. But I guess I'd just like to provide a bit of a context for this evening in terms of the history of where we've got to. So, firstly, I was involved way back in freshwater management and how it could be introduced into policy, particularly national policy, and it always kind of failed. So, more recent, what I call recent history, 2003 was the inappropriately named Sustainable Water Programme of Action. That rolled along for a number of years, and I think what happens and so with the electoral cycle and everything, things don't actually tend to happen. Confronted are quite difficult. So in 2009 there was a cabinet paper produced called A New Start for Fresh Water, and that really was the initiation of everything that's subsequently followed. And that came about from basically public opinion being at such a high level around the state of our fresh waters that the politicians could no longer ignore that issue. And that cabinet paper recognised a few key things. That's at the highest level in the country, of course. That water quality is declining and that the water demand is increasing, and you can read the rest. Better ways of managing fresh water must be found, and it endorsed a collaborative process to do that, and hence the Land and Water Forum came into being to find that better way. The Land and Water Forum went for probably longer than and involved a lot more time and effort than a lot of people probably thought when they first started on that, but that was a collaborative process with a range of stakeholders across the spectrum. And it provided recommendations in a series of reports. And out of that and those recommendations, officials then started to work through a revised national policy statement for fresh water and the associated objectives framework for that. Some of the panel members were on that objectives framework development and indeed provided assistance to the officials.
Nope. The mouse maybe.
So, in almost a parallel kind of universe, you might say, where are we at locally? How do we get there? And you can read that up there, but basically at the time, Waikato Tainui were going through their river claim with the Crown. And enshrined through that process, enshrined in legislation a vision and strategy. And that vision and strategy document requires a whole raft of things, and I've only summarised some of those in the bullet points below there. But they're important for our discussion later on. Important in understanding where that sits alongside the national policy statement. I'll do that again, why not? And so I guess we've got here, but where is here? And I'm just focusing on the Waikato and Waipa catchments, okay? There's other parts of the region which Bill might like to expand on. But the vision and strategy document provides us with guidance on what needs to be achieved in terms of freshwaters. The national policy statement provides us with a consistent framework of doing, of looking at the issues and addressing them, and the process that is underway now in terms of the Healthy Rivers Waiora process provides us with a plan, or will provide us with a plan. Okay, so that's all I want to say.
Now we have David Hamilton. He's the Bay of Plenty Regional Council Chair in Lake Restoration at the University of Waikato. He provides scientific support for management actions taking place in the Rotorua Lakes, and he's also been involved with science panels providing input to the national objectives framework of the National Policy Statement for Freshwater Management. Thanks, Dave.
Thank you, and I'm quite glad actually, because I'm going to take a completely complementary, what I hope is complementary approach to Bryce, and I'll talk about the global situation and a little bit of the science about how we sort of got here. And the slide actually says quite a lot. I'm not sure whether you know what it exactly is about, but the hotspot of producing phosphorus now is Africa. And out of Morocco there is a huge amount that is distributed not only to New Zealand, of course, but right throughout the world. We take in a fair bit of phosphorus, and of course we put out a fair bit of phosphorus too. In this particular case I'm just demonstrating how it's in the form of milk solids going off to China. But one of the consequences of that is what could be considered to be a legacy. And the legacy is that because phosphorus is cheap, $316 a tonne for superphosphate, it isn't used very efficiently. That's 30 cents per kilo for phosphorus. Andy Bruere, for example, might be able to tell me how much it takes to pull it out per kilo once it gets in the lakes. I don't know. What is it, Andy?
On an annual basis, somewhere between 8 to probably in the hundreds of dollars if you're doing treated sewage annually.
So if we don't use it efficiently, that 30 cents a kilo, which is about 20% phosphorus, so $1.50 a kilo, becomes 8, and I've seen it up to $200, $250 a kilo to pull it out at a downstream place. So it signifies that phosphorus is cheap. And we thought we were doing pretty well when we wrote this paper, and I've been thinking about it a little bit. It's a paper from 2014, and again I'm relying on Andy here in one of his photos. to illustrate this particular point, which is the use of what we call geochemical engineering to be able to lock up some of the excess phosphorus that reaches our lakes. And this particular case is a little lake in the Bay of Plenty region, Lake Waikato, and it's the use of a material that is designed to basically pick up the phosphorus, stop it being used by algae, which might otherwise potentially form blooms, and to drop it to the bottom of the lake. When I say we were smart, well, maybe this isn't so smart. We haven't used phosphorus very efficiently, and if you can't see that graph, then let me tell you where that red line is. That's at 2030. The estimates vary, but probably in 2030 we're going to hit peak phosphorus. There is the potential, as we've seen with Nauru, where we completely decimated the phosphorus mineral deposits by 2000. There is potential for us to be strongly food limited by phosphorus into the future. And it's this red block that is of interest. That's phosphate rock. That's the mineral deposits. What happened was a huge social, it's almost a social experiment in a way, where we dissociated ourselves from having to rely on that recycling of phosphorus. The green is the manure, and you can see that went up with population. But the red is the phosphorus. And so what we're doing is we've completely displaced where we got that phosphorus from. The phosphorus is now being transported from primarily Morocco, and it's coming into New Zealand, where it is being used less efficiently than what it should be. And it's not just a case of New Zealand. All around the world now, people are talking about the legacy that we're leaving. The legacy, and that is the legacy of nutrient pollution for future generations to clean up and pick up. If you don't believe it, start having a look at the European Union, the Water Framework Directive, or the total maximum daily load that's coming in the US. The regulations are getting harder, more difficult to attain, and it's a legacy that if we don't pick up and react to more strongly, we simply leave it for another generation who will have to pay a bigger and much greater cost. And when we talk about legacy, we've altered systems substantially, very substantially. Invasive plants are one of the factors, and we've re-engineered these systems. We've re-engineered them very, very substantially in a lot of ways. And I go to turn again to another publication, Hobbs and Harris, 2001, and what they showed was that if you have, for example, a biological invasion that degrades your system, then potentially you can address that biological invasion. As the system goes down a level of resilience again, and you reach a point where you get a physical change to the system, then that can be much, much tougher to address. So these systems have been re-engineered, and the re-engineering that we've now got to do is to put some of that back. And now I'm starting to fully appreciate the ecosystem services that are provided by nature. If you look around the catchments of the peat lakes, many have about 1% of the native vegetation left. That vegetation, that natural system provides a service that mitigates the impacts of, for example, our ordinary everyday activities of producing food. It's very, very important. And so if we are to address this, then we actually have to make physical as well as biological changes to these systems. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave.
Dewes, who's a lead consultant for Headlands, an agribusiness consultancy that specialises in helping farmers design their farm systems with the future in mind. She is currently completing an MSc covering freshwater ecology, policy and nutrient management in agriculture. She is a trained vet, has been in agribusiness roles and farmed herself for 25 years. More recently, she has been a sustainable land use advisor with Rokawa Charitable Trust and has been an expert witness on agricultural matters, contributing to 4 recent plan changes in New Zealand. Thanks, Alison.
Thank you, and thank you, David and Bryce. Just to set the scene with the big picture, obviously this Act, which actually gives effect to the National Policy Statement, which we are talking about this evening, and the NPS for freshwater, which then gives effect to the regional policy statements, which overarch regional plans and their methods in how water quality, freshwater quality will be managed. The Waikato Regional Council, as I understand it, is compelled to act on the vision and strategy. And Objective A1, it says the restoration of the health and well-being of the Waikato River is required to realise this vision. This is basically Section 5 of the Resource Management Act. Don't get too carried away with all the words there, but a key thread that comes through the Resource Management Act and around life support capacity, basically the common thread that comes through everything. And the public have been told in the summary of the National Policy Statement for Freshwater 2014 that councils are required to maintain and improve water quality in their regions. Objective A2 of the NPS states the overall quality of freshwater in a region is maintained or improved. So therefore any attempt to undermine this is a corruption of the intent and direction of the RMA, the NPS and the Regional Council policy. The NPS Freshwater Management promotes community planning but actually provides little, if any, guidance on how to do it well. So it could be a little bit confusing. And collaborative planning, which is underway now in many catchments, and regions, is only as good as the science that feeds into it and the process in which that science and the way that science is used. Collaborative processes can be captured and by moneyed and vested self-interest. I'm not saying that's happening, but it's something we need to be really cautious of. And so therefore it must be absolutely clear that the management of freshwater quality downwards is contrary to all acts and published policies. There is no provision to allow further reduction of water quality anywhere except for what's in the pipeline from historic activities. The NOF, or the National Objectives Framework, as Bryce has mentioned, is a recent addition to the National Policy Statement. The issue of how attributes and bans in the NOF are interpreted are in the detail. We're still not aware of the detail yet, and the NOF parameters still need guidance notes, basically, to explain really what the bottom lines really mean and how they'll work, but we haven't got time to get into that now. The reality is that our current activities are causing continued freshwater decline in many catchments. In the Waikato, we've likely overshot a line of sustainable management and ecosystem health in many subcatchments. So basically the first job is to arrest the decline. New expansion, along with dairy and associated intensification of the dry stock blocks that go with it, should effectively be constrained, in my view, so that all our efforts spent on stabilising and reducing the effects of water quality from our existing activities. This means we have to work hard on proving that mitigations actually work and ensuring these mitigations are legitimate. This will mean that we'll need to validate some of the models that we currently rely on, such as Overseer, which gives us a quantification of what's coming from land use, and so that we can actually be sure that we're providing robust measures and legitimate change. But so in the meantime, I think we need to be precautionary. And what does that actually mean? Precautionary principle or precautionary approach states that if an action or a policy is suspected risk of causing harm to the public or the environment in the absence of scientific consensus, that that policy is harmful, then the burden of proof that it is not harmful falls to those who are responsible. In some legal systems, such as the European Union, the application of precautionary principle has been made a statutory requirement. When giving effect to previous policy, including the RMA and Regional Council policies, we have not seen necessarily any evidence of a precautionary approach applied. Permission has been given to projects such as large-scale pine to pasture conversion in the Upper Waikato, despite clear knowledge that it would harm our fresh water. Do not existing farmers are actually going to be victims of this more recent expansion. They will suffer as they have to drop their diffuse losses more to make room for this growth that's actually occurred. There's potential that the clean-up costs will lie with the public and the farmers as well. There's very clear scientific consensus that it causes harm to the environment. The social responsibility to protect society from this harm still falls with the regulator. So the management of the NPS to ensure both precautionary approach and maintenance and improvement of water quality is different to what has been demonstrated. Once we have introduced proven mitigations and given them time to work, then we may be able to look at more farming, but not potentially before. Evidence of what's been going on in the Upper Waikato. We've got some real challenges ahead, in my view. Science, policy and industry must connect to deliver on these policies in an even-handed way moving forward. There seems to be a little bit of a power imbalance between the three arms. We've got to make sure that it's managed very well. And a large part of the science missing, in my view, from the discussion is how much worse will water quality actually get before it stabilises? How do we ensure it not only stabilises but improves with the least amount of harm in the medium and the long term? The management decides what will happen in the future. When dealing with the public commons, this is a deeply ethical question. The NPS still has several areas that are poorly defined, such as a NOF, as I mentioned, and there are some ambiguities in there, and it's important that these are understood and dealt with well in the public's interests. Notably, what constitutes, for example, average water quality across a region in the NOF, and how this will be measured is actually potentially open to gaming, and as is a community agreement as to allow potentially even decline, so you can have unders and overs potentially in an average when you've got averaging in freshwater management units. In my view, average water quality should be measured by volume in terms of flows of rivers or volume for lakes, and so thus you're not going to get a small stream which improves in one part of the average freshwater management unit and you get an improvement in another. It's basically got to be worked on volume. And also we need certainty and clarity with regards to how we measure improvement. Does a 10% reduction, for example, in sediment offset a 10% increase in pathogens? So just to finish, in reality, in my view, I think the buck stops with our regional councils to apply their legislative responsibility to monitor the environment, keep and make available records necessary to fulfil their duties effectively, and implement management measures through regulation and other methods to achieve sustainable management. If the Regional Council is not doing all of these things in an exemplary way, the community will find it difficult, if not impossible, to achieve good outcomes. And the NPS for freshwater management does not allow a Regional Council to pass the buck in any way. The Waikato River, as we know at the moment, is in a state of decline. It's likely to get worse before it gets better. There has been significant land use change in the upper catchment, and in 2004 about conversions that were starting in 2003, and since then we've had 50,000 hectares of conversions take place. So to finish, the NPS and NOF is not about a polluter's charter. It's up to all of us as citizens to ensure that our institutions do not allow it to become one. Thank you.
Thanks, Alison. So I'd like to introduce Bill Vant, who's a scientist with the Waikato Regional Council. He's been a government scientist for 35 years and oversees and advises on the Council's water quality and networks in rivers, lakes and coastal waters, and on its management in these environments. Thanks, Bill.
And having heard Alison, I think I've got to say, I'm not the Regional Council. I just work for them. I'm on your side. What's new in the freshwater policy statement that came out this year was a clear directive that councils have got to do things. They've got to establish objectives for water management, and most importantly, they've got to set limits. The latter one in particular is new. Councils haven't had to do, water managers haven't had to do that before. So this is new. They had to set limits firstly for water quantity, and I want to deal with that quickly because, and in the context of the Waikato region, because that's what today's talk is, evening's about. How does this apply to the Waikato? In the context of the Waikato, by and large, water quantity, how much water there is, are we short of it, is not an issue. There's plenty of water. Hamilton City is not running out. Many farmers are able to irrigate, take water from the rivers and streams. But in particular, what Council has done in the last 10 years is it's done these very things that the National Policy Statement says it has to do. It's established objectives and it's set limits for water quantity. Chapter 3.3 of the Waikato Regional Plan, which is what that means, has all the detail of it. It says how you go about getting the amount of water you might want. Okay, so that's by and large. It's the smallest you compared to water quality. However, we've got to set objectives, set limits for water quality as well. Now, as it happens, the Waikato Regional Council was the first council in the country to actually do this for a water body. We did it for Lake Taupo. We've done that over the last 10 years. For some years, Lake Taupo was the only water body in New Zealand that under the RMA actually had limits set for it, and where the management in the catchment was being regulated to meet those limits. Farmers in the Taupo catchment need a consent to farm, and the amount of nitrogen that they're able to discharge as a result of their farming activities is limited, it's capped, and it's capped to meet the water quality objectives for the lake. So, in the Waikato region, we were actually ahead of the game in terms of the National Policy Statement in the Taupo catchment, but not anywhere else. Alison's already mentioned Objective A2 of the Freshwater Policy Statement. It tells us that the overall quality of water quality in the region has to be maintained or improved while doing all these good things. Now, just very recently, a senior official from the ministry said to a number of people, I was there, that the National Policy Statement were maintained and improved. The view the officials take is that these are where we stand. Things are not allowed to get worse. Well, maybe, but when you look at these words, and Alison has already alluded to them, I think it's not so clear. When I see someone saying the overall quality must be improved, then I think we're talking about overs and unders. Bad things can happen so long as good things happen somewhere else. That's the way I interpret that clause, and it's early days. We've only just seen this thing in its final form, and who knows how it's going to pan out. But I can see a lot of one Lake Taupo is worth 50 small shallow lakes or something like that. So I don't know that it's going to be easy. And I can illustrate that by this diagram here. Some of you may have seen it before. I enjoy analysing water quality records to see whether there are changes, and I end up writing these dreary technical reports saying what the p-value is, whereas Graham, and the Kendall slope might be, or something like that. But if you go to the Waikato Council website, this is what you actually see. You see information on the 10 council monitoring sites down the length of the Waikato River, and for you see what changes there have been over the past 20 years. Smiley faces means things have got better, sad faces mean things have got worse. So in terms of that objective we saw a moment ago, is there some calculus that we're yet to develop that says 5 improvements in algal chlorophyll, somehow matches I don't know, 9 deteriorations in total nitrogen, are they balanced by 5 or so improvements in total phosphorus? So I sort of think the regional policy, the national policy statement was trying to do a good thing, but I'm left wondering whether it's just going to make life that much more complicated. So it's a discussion point for the rest of the evening, perhaps. Now, one of the other things, we've got to improve, we've got to do all these good things whilst improving degraded water bodies. And this is the topic of national bottom lines. One of the things that government has said in this policy is, regardless of all the other things you do and all of the limits and objectives that you set, there's a real no-go area. We've identified a type of water quality that's simply not acceptable. And if you have water bodies that fall below the national bottom lines, they're called, then they must be improved. So that's that phrase there. Here's the chlorophyll A concentration in 20 small lakes in the Waikato region. Most of them are in the floodplain of the Waikato River, north of here, around Tikawata and Huntly. This is the median chlorophyll concentration, the amount of algae, over the past 5 years, and the red line there is the national bottom line for chlorophyll in lakes. Less than half of the shallow lakes in the region meet the bottom line. Some of the lakes, here's the one down at Tikawata, the one that was red earlier this year, has got chlorophyll concentrations 8 times higher than the national bottom line. And the national policy statement says this cannot be. Maybe it can be offset against something else. And Alison sparked an idea in my mind. She had said, what about we volume weight things? There's 60 cubic kilometres of water in Lake Taupo, and it's got a chlorophyll of 1. Now, I'm pretty sure, I was trying to do some sums while Alison was talking, but I'm pretty sure that 60 cubic kilometres at a chlorophyll of 1 more than offsets all of this degradation there. Okay, so there's another discussion for you. Right.
Thanks, Greg.
And last in our row here, I would like to introduce Mike Scarsbrook. He's the Environment Policy Manager at DairyNZ. He has expertise in freshwater ecology, water quality and catchment management. Mike leads DairyNZ's Farming with Limits program as a member of the Healthy Rivers Technical Leaders Group and is project lead on the Upper Waikato Sustainable Milk Project. Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, Paul. Where will I find my one slide? Desktop? No, that. Close me and it's behind me. Right, so I've just got one slide because I think everyone wants to get into some robust discussion. Because I'm a very visual person and it's nice, it sort of summarises things. And this is out of the back of the NPS for freshwater management. I did though just want to start with a definition.
a definition of water quality. What actually is water quality? And Bill pointed to a whole range of chemical parameters and biological parameters. And often we talk about water quality in relation to those indicators that we measure. But to me, water quality is about the value that people want to use that water for. So the quality of water for a particular use. That's how I would define water quality. It's relatively, well, in my view, separating the term water quality from the value is a mistake. What the National Policy Statement for Freshwater Management does, in my view, is really gets people to think really clearly and really carefully about the values and uses will then drive a whole range of other information. Will actually help us define how we would measure quality for that particular use, and then provide us with a yardstick for measuring, well, are we meeting that quality for a particular use or not, and what can we do then to fix things. So two of the key values in the National Policy Statement for Freshwater, these are nationally compulsory values that have to apply to all rivers and lakes. This is so these are two values that apply everywhere. The human health value is given is described in terms of the health based around people's use of the water for contact recreation, sort of full immersion like swimming, but also secondary contact where people are just boating and don't expect to have full immersion. And things that are measured there are things like the levels of E. coli, a fecal indicator bacteria, and the levels of infection from ingestion of certain amounts of water in our activities in those waters. So values to me are absolutely critical, and values is where the community decision-making process is absolutely fundamental. Until the community has determined, decided, debated what the values are for a water body, whether it be the whole of a water management unit or a particular section of a particular stream somewhere, it's actually really, really difficult to provide an objective measure of the quality of that water for the particular value. Of course, you're always going to have a suite of values, so there's always going to be a raft of values. So any given water body will be valued for perhaps for recreation, for fishing, for mahanga kai, for food production, for hydropower. So actually making sense of those values and those often conflicting values is again a really critical thing for the community to get their heads around. When you move from the values, when you've actually determined what you want in terms of the values and uses, that's when scientists can actually say, right, the best way to measure that value is X. The best way to measure the risk of infection of Campylobacter when you're swimming in this waterway is to measure the levels of E. coli over a out of there. That will tell you whether that water body is suitable for that particular use. I've got a pointer.
There's a pointer here.
Oh, yeah. So in the National Objectives Framework, there's a lot of talk about attributes, and these are how you actually measure those particular values, such as ecosystem health. And it provides a banding system, so A, B, C, D. And to me, this is one of the fundamental improvements or big steps forward in the National Policy Statement. For the first time, it provides us a national approach to defining what A, B, C, D, or excellent, good, fair, poor, actually means in terms of measurable attributes relating to values. In the past, we've often heard people say, this water is poor or this water is degraded. The problem is we haven't necessarily had a consistent framework for providing that description of our systems. Limit setting is also, as Bill's already talked about, an absolutely critical element of the NPS for freshwater management. And that's again where the community comes back in, because limit setting is not just a science question, it's about the community determining the costs and benefits and the balancing and the optimising of that suite of values and the costs and benefits that go with that. As envisaged, you get to a point, hopefully, where everyone's sort of holding hands still and getting to a point where there's an objective or a set of objectives for waterways in the region enshrined in the plan. The plan is notified, people submit on it, goes through the process, and we end up with a regional plan that tracks a pathway forward for the region. And I guess the other important thing, particularly from my own perspective working in the dairy industry, is we must never forget how hard it is for people on the ground to make some of these changes. And the implementation phase really is, does take quite a lot of work, and we shouldn't underrate it. But every step in this process is really valuable and important, and certainly from my perspective, this is a major step forward for New Zealand. Thanks, Paul.
Thanks, Paul.
May I ask a question, please? Why is no one talking about soil? For Pete's sake, why is no one talking about soil? Everyone here is farming soil. Everyone in New Zealand is farming soil. When I farm soil, I use lime-back dust. The clover roots go into 37 centimetres. Clover roots. Every time I take on, I've got 400 farmer clients now. I've consulted 500 in my time. Everyone has a hard pan, and the roots will go down like that because of high aluminium, lack of lime, and a few other things. And it can be fixed in no time. I've got farmers who double their production, farmers who last year paid $140,000 off their mortgage, and so on. And it's all in an e-book, the biggest in the world, called raisinginfo.com. Raisinginfo1word.com. Mine is Vaughan Jones. And I'm in I've never charged anything towards that, and I don't charge my time towards that. I do newsletters 1 or 2 a month, and that is answering what people ask me, and I don't charge for that. So I put a lot of money into it, but I'm not worried because New Zealand's been so good to me. I'm born in South Africa, came here, brother murdered over there, another one shot. New Zealand's so good to me, my family, so I just want you all to learn, please, and farm soils. Do the right things for your soils. Then everything will come right. You won't believe the clover you'll grow. You won't need urea. None of my clients use urea, except one guy did. He was putting it on and he said, oh, I don't know why I'm doing it.
So I'd just like to set a couple of ground rules here.
We charge him for that answer.
If you could actually stand and speak, as we've had. This is being recorded tonight, so I'd like you to be audible. And if you direct your question to a member of the panel, that would be useful as well. So we can get started.
Bill, so in your talk you mentioned about the state of the water body and some being degraded. From a scientific point of view, what state is the Waikato River in now? Is it degraded?
Not especially degraded. It's certainly not pristine. Okay, what I'm trying to do as we talk is think about the ABC, as I talk, is think about the ABC grading. I'm confident that no aspects of the main stem of the Waikato River are D, all right, so it's not poor. In parts of the upper river, in both in the compulsory requirements for ecological health and swimming, it's certainly excellent. I'd say Hydro Lakes, down to Waipapa come in A grade. We're talking about C probably by the time we get into the lower river. So it varies. Thanks, Stuart. I haven't had the thought of grade the river before. But yeah, it can be done.
Yeah, Don Coles. Well, we've been told that to Narrawahia it is swimmable, Waikato River. A recent publication in the Waikato Times. I don't know if you'd agree with that or not.
The E. coli levels all the way down the river at the moment, and that's to say over the last 5 years, meet the swimming guidelines in the Waikato Regional Plan. It's an E. coli level of median level of 126. E. coli levels in the last 5 years have been less than 126.
So is there anything in the Waikato River that's causing it to be non-swimmable?
The lower river is murky, and a 20-year-old guideline from the Ministry for the Environment basically said if when you go into the water you can't see your feet, then it's unsafe because you won't be able to see submerged hazards. We call that water clarity. The lower river is murky and it doesn't meet that guideline.
So that's the only thing that compromises it?
Yep. From the point of view of the microbiological concerns, it meets the guideline, it meets stringent guidelines, and these are much more stringent than the national bottom line, which is not 126, it's 1,000.
So does nitrate compromise any of those?
No.
I think if I could add a little bit to that as well. And you asked about the main extent, but of course the situation with some of the tributaries feeding into it is quite different. So if you looked at those,
sure.
Some of them would
breach the swimming guideline, the 126,
yeah.
But not the national bottom line.
No.
Or sorry, there is one.
Andy Brewer, I was going to pick on Bill again too. You talked about sort of averaging across the water bodies.
I was being provocative.
I'm sure that you were just enjoying a bit of fun there. But we use another method of averaging across time in one water body. And so when you say something might meet a standard, have you got some comments around things meeting a standard all the time, 100% of the time, or 90% of the time, or percentages of the time? And I'm referring, I guess, to measures that we use in plenty such as the TMI, those types of measures that average things over a year. And what's the implications of that for parts of the year?
A long time ago, when people were setting resource consents and water permits, it was the maximum. You, the discharger, can pollute the water bodies so long as you don't discharge more than this number. Now, dischargers don't like that because you never know when the real maximum is going to come, when the system falls over. So we had to move away from maxima to 95 percentiles. 95 percentile means 5% of the time things can be very bad, but we'll live with it. I suppose the medians mean that half of the time things can be bad and it won't happen. The chlorophyll standard that I mentioned in the national bottom line is a median of 12. Half of the sample. What's it about? It's simply saying we've got to set limits somewhere. We could choose maxima. Some of the national standards are set in terms of medians.
My name's Trevor Simpson. I'm a dairy farmer right next to the Waikato River, not far from Lake Waikato. So I feel a bit punch drunk at times coming to these discussions. But I find we have to accept that the rivers aren't doing very well. And I think this concept is very good. But from a public perception, I don't think we tell a true story good enough. And we've got the 10 sites there down the river. I think we need to start a system of informing everybody, and I mean published maybe twice a year at the Waikato Times, or a paper that goes everywhere, not a website, something that's right out there. And we might have 100 sites, and I mean starting at Te Karu, where in theory the water is at its best, or the top end of Taupo, coming before and after a main event, whether it's a town, a tributary, a city, or whatever, and publish maybe 5 important things, whether it's Kakolai and a few others, and put them out there and say, this is where it's going over the years. And so people can see it's not just dairy farmers that are causing a problem, and I accept dairy farmers are causing a problem, but it's the city runoff, it's the road runoff, it's the effluent systems from towns that still discharge some stuff into the river. There's a whole host of stuff. And I think if it's, instead of the stuff we, a bit like politics really, we don't know what it is in the end, but if we had just a concise thing which built up over time, so people can see, oh look, it comes into Hamilton, 5 k's out of Hamilton, it's this, it leaves Hamilton at that. I like to think it's the same, but and so people can actually get a true picture, because there's so much, you know, I don't know what it is, but there's just so much stuff out there, and I think everybody accepts there's a problem. But people like to read the truth and to see where the changes are, and then make a decision whether, hey, I live in Hamilton, I'm actually contributing to this. Hey, I'm a dairy farmer, you know, I've done this, and you can see as it comes down, it's getting worse, and people can take ownership of it. But at the moment, it's just lots of talk, lots of articles, and everybody says, oh, it's not my problem. But it is. It's everybody's problem.
Can we respond?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, of course.
I guess one of the issues has been that declines have been identified, and in some cases, not that many actually, it has been quite difficult to go and pinpoint sources. But if you look at the Rotorua catchment, for example, then about 72% to 73% is caused by pastoral systems of the human-related part of it. About 6% is due to a residual of basically the wastewater treatment plant. And so, you know, in cases like that, we do have some very clear science to back it. I guess one of the concerns about this is being able to replicate that in so many different locations around the country, because what Bill has reported is only a trend. It's very difficult to go to one place and go to another. Oh, it must be that. And the one consistent thing, though, is the trend. And I believe that if you look for the trend, then you'll be able to more clearly identify what may have been causal factors that altered. Having said that, there is a legacy. And I think the latest NIWA report was at 52 years or something for the groundwater. And so if you go up to the upper catchment, Taupo, for example, is around, I estimated, 40 to 50 years for a response time. So basically what we're seeing is water quality as it is 40 to 50 years ago. And those are the timescales in which we might be able to change systems. Smaller systems will respond more quickly.
A very significant piece of work done by Waikato River Independent Scoping Study, and there's some really good information in that report, and perhaps we can point people to that. But it shows the levels of various contaminants as you go from Hooker Falls all the way down the Waikato River. It's really useful information to show that trend, that changes in contaminant levels as you go down the river. And yes, you do see particular points in space. So, you know, the junction of the Waipa and the Waikato River, for example, is a major change in the quality of the river for a range of uses. So, and the levels of contaminants. So that's really useful information.
communication.
Yeah.
Communication with the public and engagement with the public with it. And I think we've got to get better at that. We've got to get alongside the media, ensure that we can get good stories out there, not necessarily all about good things, but the right stories out there, and get them in front of people.
You've got to get the honest story out.
That's right.
They need solutions. They all these arguments, they don't need solutions.
Yep, you need that as well.
On top of it.
Absolutely. And today we've really talked about the NPS and the issues and so on. And taking your first earlier point, we haven't talked about the good things that can be done and the solutions. You know, that's the other side of it as well. And farmers or district councils or whatever that are doing good things in terms of improving the discharges from their land or
And the
from their
city,
wastewater
Hamilton
system.
Lake's the dirtiest lake in the country. What's the econ out there, Bill? Hamilton Lake.
Don't know, but I don't think it's, well, it'll be borderline for swimmable. I don't think it's been measured for the last 20 years, quite frankly.
The Waikato Ferry,
The
Waikato Ferry stream, which runs into Hamilton, into Waikato River at Fairfield Bridge, has the highest levels of E. coli sites in the Waikato Waipā. There's about 22,000 colony forming units per 100 mil, and Bill talked about swimming being 126 per 100 mil.
And jobs are told not to drink the water in Hamilton Lake.
That's because there's an algal bloom there at present, not E. coli, toxic algae.
Sue Edmonds. I'm curious. I'm always puzzled about how this thing is supposed to work, because we're talking about moving water. So if we have values at the top end which say we can ship in the river anytime we like, then everybody below that is affected by it. And so that the people nearer the bottom of the river get very few choices, because whatever's happened has happened before it got there. Can somebody enlighten me on that?
I guess, Sue, you've hit on the fundamental property of rivers, haven't you? It flows downhill and everything with it. That the NP has tried to what they call freshwater management units. So what do you define as your freshwater management unit? So for example, you could define the whole of the Waikato Waipā catchment as a single unit and manage it, management like that. In some parts of the country, in Horizons, Manawatu for example, they broke their region up into about 119 different subzones to provide guidance around management. So it's part of being able to define where those water management units are, and then also understand that, yes, if you set limits in the upper Waikato, for example, you are going to have to live by those limits further downstream, and vice versa. If high standards are set in the lower river, then it's going to very seriously affect what happens in the upper river.
Can I be a little bit more direct about that? Sue, I think the point you're trying to make is maybe the farmer at Lake Waikare, who suddenly has an imposition of some quite considerable limits and may have been farming, in fact, quite capably and very ably for a number of years. Why would those limits come about? Well, at the moment we're still changing land use quite substantially in the upper catchment, as you're aware. And that is going to impact upon the future capabilities of those in the lower catchment as the limits start to become more well defined. And that is one of my major concerns. At the moment, people are investing in the upper catchment and making an assumption about what is happening in the upper catchment at a time when that investment hasn't actually materialised yet. In the lower catchment, it may be quite different, and many farmers, as we know, have been farming that lower catchment very capably for many years.
Look, this boy can ask his question now.
Hi, my name is Abbas Mohammed. I'm from Peterborough Intermediate.
You'll have to speak up.
Hi, my name is Abbas Mohammed. I'm from Peterborough Intermediate. I just want to know what are the main causes of river pollution in the Waikato River apart from dairy farming. What can we do?
Nothing.
What can we do as a community to improve this problem? I haven't understood some points from this conversation. Can you explain to me in detail?
I think was also Mike referenced it, so it's a bit of it's partially a cop-out, but I think if you went to the website and Googled the Waikato River Independent Scoping Study, you'll find an analysis of that. And I think in terms of loads, there's different kinds of pollution of different sorts, right? So there's nitrogen, there's phosphorus, there's sediment, there's E. coli, and they have different sources. So they come from different places. So if you look at, if you go to, say, the Waikato River join, you'll see that. You'll see the Waipa has a lot of sediment in it. So for the river system, the Waipa River and some of the erodible soils, hill soils back up in the catchment are contributing to that sediment. So that's a significant sediment source to the system. On the other hand, if you look at something like associated with leaching through the soil and into the rivers, and that can be typically in the dairy land is where a lot of that nitrogen leaching occurs. So the lower parts of the Waipa, the upper parts of the Waikato River. So it's a little bit horses for courses where the pollution comes from. So you've got to consider the contaminant, if you like, that you're interested in.
Let me add by just say I want to be a bit more even-handed than I might have seemed to. And that is to say that there are natural sources of many of these contaminants. More than 200 years, before we began to develop farming in the Waikato catchment, there was nitrogen and phosphorus and sediment and probably and E. coli flowing down the river. There are natural sources of these things. We know when we go and take measurements from the very few remaining undeveloped areas in the Waikato region, and there are still areas in native bush and lovely streams flow out of them, we know that they do have loads of nitrogen and phosphorus and sediment coming out of them naturally. So there is always a natural background as well.
Do you know what you can do to improve this?
Oh, absolutely. So one of the things around limit setting is we determine what the levels of those contaminants should be. So, for example, the levels of nitrogen or phosphorus or sediment or E. coli. And then, depending on where above those levels, so we might say that that system is degraded. Over time, we'll aim to bring those levels down. And there are a whole range of things we can be doing. So on farm, for example, if we're concerned about nitrogen losses from farm, there are a whole range of things dairy farmers and sheep and beef farmers can do to be a lot more efficient in the use of nitrogen. So as was pointed out earlier, you can change the nitrogen fertiliser use, you can change your stocking rate patterns, you can change the way you farm, and that's going to reduce the amount of contaminants that that farm loses. Similarly, in cities, you could stop using certain detergents to reduce the phosphorus load on the system. There's a whole range of things, and it's about people understanding and becoming aware of what they can do, and then taking that up.
I'll just add to that, Mike, thanks. And in the Lake Taupo catchment, where the farmers are actually farming under limits right now, the sorts of things that Mike was talking about for limiting their nitrogen loads are actually happening. And it's being done on their farms. Go away and decide how you want to farm within that limit. You know best. We don't.
Don't come to me.
Sean Hewland, Waikato River Authority, and I've got a question.
Hang on, sorry, Sean. So what is DairyNZ doing to reduce nitrogen use? So we've implemented programs to measure inputs and outputs from dairy farms right throughout the country. And with that information, we'll be able to understand and identify benchmarks, understand what good management practice looks like on farm, and then through a whole range of education processes and on-farm environmental planning, get farmers to adopt those practices, which make them a lot more efficient. So that's one of the things we do.
Sure. Question for Alison. Alison, two questions really. One, Bryce pointed out at the beginning that the defining document and guidance for the catchment is actually the vision and strategy. From your view, working with people, do you think people actually realise that that's in place and that it sets a much higher bar than the national policy statement? And the second one is listening to yourself and David. Would you say that given lag times and the levels of current contamination we're finding in the upper river, that it's quite strange that the regional already?
Thanks for that, Sean. My experience is that no, I don't think there's a great level of awareness out there about the vision and strategy. Yeah, it's a vision and it's a legal agreement between the Crown and set a bar that's higher than the lines and the bottom lines that...
It hasn't got any numbers.
It talks about health and the bottom lines and the national
Talks
talk about stress. And then just to touch on the other one, I made it quite clear in my address that I mean, really at the end of the day, we need to put a stake in the ground with continued intensification and expansion in the upper catchment, which is also touched on by David, to answer Sue's question, that as we keep expanding in the upper catchment, it's cannibalising nutrient headroom from the established farmers that have been farming in the lower catchment for years and years. And so to the point that if we're talking about nitrogen loss reduction, that might have only had to have been to the extent of say 20 to 30% to get back to health levels in the, or to get close to health levels or ecosystem health levels in the Waikato River. For example, we might be looking at potentially 50% reductions on the established farms simply due to the expansion that's occurred in the upper river, which David also touched on.
Kia ora, Al Fleming from Forest and Bird. Great, Alison, that leads into my question very well. Both you and David have referred to the effect of land use change in the upper catchment on farmers doing it right, i.e. they being capping in the future. The question is, given that the Healthy Rivers project will take approximately 4 years, say, to lead to a plan change, to a regional plan, who have responsibilities for water quality, what can district councils do in the meantime, given they have responsibility around land use, but not directly on water quality? And that's in the context that land use affects water quality.
Who is that directed at? Oh, okay, good. And then you can go next. I think in the short term, we've got some real challenges ahead. We don't, from what I can see in the Waikato, is that we don't have a really good database of what's actually happening in terms of diffuse losses from farms, and we don't seem to have a good database of really what's happening with land use, even in terms of what's happening with sheep and beef, how much is dairy support, and also what the losses are from dairying, those different land uses. We've got some averaging, a lot of it's held by industry, and because we haven't had controlled activities in place, certainly even at the district council level, we've had no compulsions for the district or regional councils to be collecting any data. So you could argue that how are we going to make plans when we haven't even got some good loss rates or data from the different districts or regions? So for a start, having some sort of controlled activity so that there's a compulsion to actually start collecting that data by the regulatory authorities would be a really good start. Bill?
No, I can't add anything, Alison. Thank you. I'll just add to that. So the dairy industry is collecting that information right now. So in the Upper Waikato, we've been working with all 700 dairy farms to collect that information. And nationally, we're rolling that out as well. So, but I absolutely agree with Alison that it would be foolhardy to try and set plans, particularly around a particular contaminant, nitrogen, which tends to sort of take prominence over the other contaminants we're talking about in the Healthy Rivers process, to not have that information about the sources. And again, the National Policy Statement on Freshwater requires the regional councils to put in place accounting systems. And yes, that's going to take some time, but without that fundamental information about where the pressures are, where the sources are, it makes it, I think, foolhardy to make or put rules in place without knowing where it's coming from and how much is coming from those areas.
So can I just add to that, Mike? That's really good that you're saying that you've got that. That's industry-held information. Is it going to be made transparent to the regional council, who are the regulators who have to then make the plans and then allocate nutrient headroom or nutrient loss rights? So we've got this challenge that I touched on around science, industry and policy, and are we all going to work together for the common good here? And the other point I'd like to make is that although you're collecting that data, it has to be valid, it has to be robust, and it has to have enough rigour in terms of its collection, how it's been verified during that collection, in a way that it can be used in a meaningful way.
So absolutely, the Upper Waikato project, for example, is co-funded by Waikato River Authority, and that part of the terms of that funding is that the information is shared as part of the Healthy Rivers process. We're working in partnership with Environment Canterbury around the matrix of good management, around identifying what good looks like in terms of farm practice. So right throughout the country, the dairy industry is working with every regional council, and as that information comes to light, I mean, we're absolutely going to be working in partnership to do that. The other thing around robust and quality data is, again, that's, my background at NIWA was around the National Rivers Water Quality Network, and it's fundamental. Without good quality data, going into a model like Overseer, you might as well just make a wild guess. So absolutely, I think that's critical, having that good, robust information.
Question for Mike. During your talk, you appeared to be excusing additional pollution. Can you give me a quite unequivocal statement that the dairy industry won't use the NPS as an excuse to add pollution to already declining catchments?
That's an excellent question. So, as I say, I define water quality in relation to values. So the values of particular, you got that? Yeah. So pollution to me is the loss of value. Pollution is not changes in the levels of contaminants.
Thank you.
Weasel how do you define pollution? So a 1% change over 10 years in, say, phosphorus concentrations, is that increase? It depends on the values.
But to me, you're saying whatever you don't have to price externalities, then your notional and economic gain is all that counts.
No,
because you don't price
I'm saying it comes back to values, and as I said, values are what is determined by the community. The community is everybody in this room, plus 200,000 other people across the region.
But that brings another point, that the community is not part of the collaborative stakeholders group. The only way you could involve them would be with a referendum.
Great idea. At the moment, we're working through a process where we've got a collaborative stakeholder group represented by a whole range of stakeholders. And yes, it will. That's not the end of the process, though. It'll still go through the normal RMA process once the plan change has been notified. It is very, very difficult to get a collaborative process where everybody is engaged. And I know some groups have chosen to step outside that collaborative process.
Because it's let them down.
Well, this is the thing. It's perhaps their perception is that their particular values aren't being promoted, but it may be that the majority's values have been promoted.
I'm referring to the Canterbury Zone Committees, which are generally perceived.
Yeah, great opinion.
Mike, what about so I want to get this clear. So with ecosystem health, a compulsory value, we've got quantitative national bottom lines. Algal chlorophyll mustn't be more than 12. Do you have a difficulty with that? I mean, chlorophyll is actually the water quality measure, and that's the measure of the value.
Yeah.
Happy with that?
So if the community in setting an objective would say over the next 10 years we want to maintain of chlorophyll A. Wonderful. Okay. We're working towards that.
I think the situation in the Waikato Waipā catchments is different. Just repeat what I put up on the board there on the screen, which was the role of the vision and strategy, which is in legislation. So I implore people to read that very. Actually sets. It's got to be swimmable, right? There's no debate about that. It's got. How long you take to get there? It's got to be swimmable. That is, what's that? That's an A it's an A grade or something, isn't it? In the NOF framework, as opposed to the bottom line.
Now, see, I disagree with you there, Bryce. I think if you just leave it at swimmable, then that begs the whole question. Yeah, how many people can get sick? 8% of the population, as under the national guidelines?
Oh, sure. And that's why the collaborative group is shot.
Oh, well, so swimmable in some parts of the country might mean 20% of the population getting sick.
No, you've got national
or
consistency.
Yeah.
So the acceptable level for swimming, for full immersion contact recreation in the NOF is a 95th percentile, less than 550. Everywhere in the country, that number applies to what's acceptable for swimming.
5 times the average, the current average. So
No,
it's all right to get
no, he's talking about a median.
Yeah. There were two systems are running parallel.
Yeah.
Still.
Well, no, because the NOF numbers will replace whatever numbers the regional council is using.
Yeah. But right now, the Waikato Regional Plan is a legal document, and it says 126. Yeah. Median.
Excuse me,
So
could you please put up your slide 2?
Possibly.
Yeah. See if we can find it.
A minute, something, Mike, can you please explain how you can reconcile your statement before with Bryce's slide 2?
Sure.
You wanted number 2, did you?
That's 2.
That's 2?
The bottom statement.
Consensus decision making.
Should not be required to absorb further degradation.
So what does degradation mean? To me, degradation means loss of values.
Yeah, but that's
But that's only my
you in
opinion.
this whole room, no one else.
No, hang on. So again, the question is, so does a 1% increase in the levels of phosphorus over 20 years, is that degradation?
No, but a 10% increase in nitrogen over 3 years does.
So 10% is no good, but 1% is okay.
Splitting hairs.
Splitting hairs. It's weasel.
No, it's about value. So if the community says, right, our value is swimming, and we want 50% of the sites in the wider Waikato to achieve swimmability by 2025. We work towards that. If we haven't achieved that, if we've actually gone backwards, that's degradation to me. So that we haven't achieved the objective the community wants.
Well, we're already in a declining trend. So
Declining?
Day,
So what?
The trend lines are declining over what they were in 2006, for example.
What are we declining in?
Generalised, well, not your value definition, but most people's measures of water quality.
No. So we go back, how do you define water quality?
The 10 things that I have.
So is aquatic ecosystem, so is swimmability getting worse or better in the Waikato?
Slightly worse. I think we had 3 sad faces. 3 out of 10 sad faces.
So does that mean there are fewer days now people can swim?
No. It means that the E. coli level is currently okay, but at 3 sites the levels are going up, getting closer to the not okay point.
And where are those sites?
Forgotten.
So I think what we've seen a little bit here, though, is the application of the ZOF and the way it's interpreted, and who says, and I say, and who says, is actually going to want to actually change the current behaviour.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. You might be, but some are.
My name is Velat Roy-Pandi. I have the Dutch nationality. I moved to New Zealand about 6 years ago. Before that, I have an extensive environmental management back in the Netherlands. I did some papers on environmental management and sustainable management. What I don't understand is we have Mr. Spierings from Fonterra is also from the Netherlands, so he knows about the dairy industry practices in the Netherlands. It's about comparable. Probably the Dutch is a little bit more than the New Zealand one. What I don't understand is why there are no set limits, hard set limits on pollutions like phosphorus, nitrogen. We have 21 about point source pollution and about the diffuse pollution. So we don't get that story from dairy farmers about values. We don't have any discussion in Netherlands about values. They say about, hey, these are the limits, just obey or chop. Basically, sorry. It's not that personally. But then over years, when we talked in 1971, that is 43 years ago, and we already reduced within 5 years, the industry was very innovative and very efficient because they need to get the targets. And they said they managed to get it under the targets, and then we targeted the dairy farmers afterwards. And they are very innovative in reducing the pollution through the soil, is going runoff to the waterways. So we got quite clean water, And it also helps when the European directive on environmental is pushing to the member states. So what I don't understand is all the talking about MPS with no hard limits. Why the big elephant in the room, we don't name it, just like the hot potato that no one wants to have it? Am I wrong? Or
One reason why things are so much more stringent in Europe is that things are so much worse. The water is unsafe to drink because it's got so much nitrogen in it.
So if I get water?
No! The number for drinking is 11 parts per million. Even down the bottom of the Waikato River, we're not even 1 part per million of nitrate. Of course the European standards have to be so much more stringent because the water would be poisonous otherwise. We're not talking about nitrogen, a growth promoter, too much algae, and it's a much lower concentration.
And there are and the NPS does have bottom lines.
And we're nowhere near them.
And so you know, the concept that either you know, does that mean that you pollute until you get to that bottom line, or does that mean, which is the debate that's going on now, does that mean that you look at keeping things above that bottom line, or not letting things change or head towards that bottom line?
The nitrate bottom line for rivers is 7 parts per million. Nowhere in the Waikato region do we get anywhere near that.
That's right.
But 1 part per million at Tuakau.
Can we just add, sorry that I'm jumping in here, but unfortunately for rivers, they've set nitrogen toxicity as the bottom line. So at Huntly, the nitrate level is sitting at 0.35 milligrams per litre. It would still be an A band even when it goes up by 300%.
Yeah, absolutely.
So is that what we're aiming for?
I didn't think that was a sensible,
It's not.
sensible attribute.
I guess if you applied the Waikato River case, accepting for the moment Sean's point about the division and strategy, the difficulty there is that you don't have much to go on because most river systems, the limit is actually based around periphyton. Periphyton is slime hard bottom streams. The Waikato River is a soft bottom stream, and the reason why you don't get a lot of, there's no periphyton, so you have no ability to create that limit. The other limit that might potentially apply is chlorophyll, the suspended microscopic algae in the water. The reason through the dams in about 25 days, roughly. Not enough time to be able to really grow algae properly. If you trap that water in the dam for a year, then it would be completely different. So in actual fact, it's a very difficult situation because there are no standing sort of limits in terms of the ecosystem health.
That's good. So we don't need any regulations. Thank you. We'll wait till top of the class, mate.
Yeah, Mike Moss, dairy farmer and DairyNZ levy payer, even though maybe reluctantly. I'd like to challenge you, Mike. One of my issues with DairyNZ, which I'm part of, is that we've got some fantastic people of dairy production. I think contributing to the problem. And what I see on farms at consulting officer level, working with farmers, is more of the same old, of environmental management, production issues being discussed in isolation to environmental outcomes. And often when you raise, like, okay, we've walked around a farm, there's riparian issues, there's effluent management issues, we're not discussing that today, we're discussing production. And so often we'll be on, say, an overstock property where the answer is more nitrogen. 2 years back, with the little boxes you have in the Waikato Times there with bits of fantastic advice, included more nitrogen. And I think we're wanting to all move forward, we all want the same thing, and you've got part of your organisation doing great work and part of your organisation creating a problem. Not a bad sustainable business model, because you're always going to be in business. I would put it to you that at the coalface you're 10 to 20 years behind the 8 ball, and culturally the organisation needs to start walking the talk at the coalface.
Well, I value that too.
Mike Moss is a top organic farmer.
I think we, a few months ago now, ourselves and Alison was there as well, we, with a different organisation, but DairyNZ made a submission to the Local Government and Environment Select Committee on the National Policy Statement. And we said we really do to be put in place as quickly as possible. For the very reason that was brought out earlier is this, you know, the more and more farms you add into a catchment, the more and more nitrogen load you add into a catchment, the harder it's going to be for those people to then achieve the limits when they do get set. So, you know, as an organisation, we absolutely support the limit setting process, and we support that happening as quickly as possible. There's more nutrient use efficiency rather than just more and more nutrient use. But it is a difficult message to get across. But I think farmers are understanding more and more about the effects. So when I joined DairyNZ 6 years ago, the only thing farmers talked about was effluent management, because that was what the big stick was that was pummeling them. So I think in the last 6 years there's been a move where effluent issues have predominantly been sorted out, and farmers are coming to terms with these nutrient issues that are rising than others, but certainly in the Waikato those issues are coming quite quickly.
The stop.
My name is Simon Scott. And Alison, you mentioned that the buck stops with the regional councils, and then Bill mentioned the example of where limits actually have been set in the Lake Taupo catchment. And you know, that seems like it's worked really well, but that was millions and millions of dollars, and it's taken quite a long time to implement. And do regional councils actually have the capacity to, say, the Waikato Regional Council have the capacity to set limits throughout the whole catchment? And, you know, do they need more government assistance?
Well, as I understand it, it's their responsibility to protect the resources for future generations.
Taupo was hard because it was first. I think there's a general hope that the rest won't be anywhere near as hard as that. Taupo was hard because people felt threatened by it. You know, regulators were coming to tell them how to run their business.
It's the law.
We don't want to, well,
it's the law. Once the law is the law.
In saying that though, Bill, to be fair, the Taupo farmers in that catchment have been paid for their nitrogen at an amount of around 444,000 per tonne of nitrogen leaving the root zone.
How many dairy farms in Taupo?
Few.
So we have still got the whole Waikato that is the public going to pay for that to meet ecosystem health standards? Question mark, $444,000 a tonne.
Yeah. So the other way of describing it is, at Taupo the stakes were very high. You know, you can see 16 metres over the side of the boat. You know, whether or not you can see your feet is simply not an issue. So maybe we picked the low-hanging fruit early on, and the rest of the catchment is going to be a lot harder. I mean, $80 million of our public money has gone to the landowners that Alison mentioned, and I'm sure she's right. We can't do something like that for the rest of the Waikato catchment.
I don't think our kids can afford it, Bill.
No, I'm sure they can't.
most pollution comes from the backgrounders all around the lake.
No,
Yes.
not true.
Yes, your figures. Your figures.
Hello, I'm Rex Bush and I'd like to direct my question to you, David. There seems to be a hell of a lot of argument about what is pollution and what isn't pollution among the scientists we've got on our forum here. It is well known that invertebrates, there's a waterways are an ecosystem which have invertebrates in, and different invertebrates tolerate different standards of impurities within the water. So you can actually grade waterways by measuring the types of invertebrates that are actually in the water. Has this ever been used or thought of introducing to save these great arguments as to what is swimmable and all the other arguments, Dave?
I think, and I hope, you've almost got unanimity amongst the panel that invertebrates should have been included in some way in the National Objectives Framework. In other words, there was the potential to roll out an invertebrate measure for streams in particular that I think would have been robust enough to have been used in a regulatory context. It wasn't, unfortunately, and so what we do, I believe, is we push back to 2016, and then the farmer might have to ask, well, what am I going to do? You guys are changing the rules, and so it's been a very difficult process to get to where we are now. And I have to say that some of my colleagues probably haven't put the nets on the line maybe as much as what we would have liked them to have got to that point. And this, the example would be the MCI, which Bryce knows very well, and I know Mike knows very, very well. And yeah.
One of the things that the Objectives Framework was trying to do, and why MCI may have fallen off the end, was it was trying to link the attributes and the values, as Mike said, to things that we actually manage in the catchments. So nitrogen is there, we manage nitrogen. Phosphorus is there. Now, MCI in the streams, you know, how healthy the macroinvertebrates are, well, that's not something that we manage on the land.
But an alternative argument to that.
Yep.
But firstly, I think if you look carefully in the NPS and in the NOC, you'll see where it talks about ecosystem health. It says that one of the measures you might use, if you wish, is a measure of macroinvertebrates. So that's as far as it went. But the conversation around whether a measure should be included into the framework was an interesting one that I could never get a lot of satisfaction on, because my argument was okay, so you put periphyton in there, but you're not willing to put macroinvertebrates in. Now, periphyton are not solely periphyton biomass. It's not solely driven by nitrogen and phosphorus. It's driven by a whole lot of other things, like how often it floods and washes them off, like how much shade you've got over the stream that prevents them growing anyway, no matter what the nitrogen and phosphorus. So, in a sense, macroinvertebrates are an index, is a measure of ecosystem health. It's an indicator to say, hey, is the system okay or not? Doesn't take Bill's point. It doesn't link it doesn't directly point you to the source of the issue, but it tells you whether you've got an issue. And so I think in the panel here, and I think amongst a lot of freshwater scientists, I think there was some disappointment that the MCI or some measure of macroinvertebrate community was not included.
In the likes of the Manawatu River, where there is definitely a periphyton problem, then you can work backwards from the periphyton, and the national bottom lines on the periphyton, to sure that you meet that. The Waikato catchment is quite different. There is no periphyton in the Waikato River, mainly because it's too deep. But even in the shallow tributaries, there's no periphyton because the rocks are all covered by layers of mud from years of development, I guess. So periphyton grows on rocks. Most of our tributary streams are soft bottom, they're muddy.
So one of the big challenges we face with the healthy rivers is there are some major gaps in the national objectives framework. There's some major elements missing in terms of the attributes of how we measure ecosystem health, human health, mahinga kai, etc. How are we in the Waikato going to fill in those gaps that MFE has left for us? And I'm sure we will have the conversation about macroinvertebrates and using them in some way in the Healthy Rivers process.
I suppose I'd just like to ask the panel a question. So going forward, how much opportunity will there be to influence what we have now as the standards that we're working to? Like, can they be changed as we go forward? Is there room for that to happen?
The standards that have come out in the National Policy Statement are the bottom lines. They simply say you can't see anything less than that. It's up to the community to say how much better than that you want to say it, set it. And yes, that's where you do have a say.
Right. Okay.
We're talking about planning under the old RMA, but it's just got a new flavour and it's got some limits set to it.
Right.
But all of these plans involve public participation.
Right. Okay. So, that person back? No. That person back up there. Yep.
Mine's exactly a question. I just want to raise it. We seem to talk about the regional council here saying buck stops there. There's a lot of concern about water quality, but we seem to talk about the regional council as if it's some foreign body separate to all of us.
He's just along the road from you.
It's elected by people. It's elected by us, both the people who run the regional council, our councillors. It's funded by the rates that we all pay. And yet, in local body elections, both district and regional council, I don't know the exact numbers, but I know it's around 40% of people vote. I mean, and we talk about how do we get people engaged in issues when one of the key issues is around local body elections as well. I just wanted to comment, it's sort of a conundrum there with people saying they care about something a lot, and yet there's very little engagement in a body which we all see as important and is actually representing us and funded by us.
Well, I think from the dairy sector's perspective, we're trying to get farmers engaged in this Healthy Rivers process. I think our first round of 6 meetings, we got about 130 or 140 farmers out of the probably 2,500 that are in the catchment. So, you know, that engagement, getting people engaged in the process and getting them to understand that this is going to affect everyone in the Waikato Waipa catchment, whether they're in Hamilton or Ngarawaki or Pataru or out on the farm in Reparoa. It's going to affect everybody. I think it's really important, but the engagement at the moment is quite limited.
Hi, I'm Graham Gleeson. In your opening bios, you talk about phosphate as a problem, and then Alison was talking about, you know, forestry to farm conversion, 50,000, let's say 150,000 cows going on. That's a nitrogen problem, I would say. So where is it? Is it phosphate or nitrogen, or are we really talking about something intense?
Regional Council has said for the plan change that we're calling Healthy Rivers, there are 4 contaminants that need to be focused on: nitrogen, phosphorus, sediment and E. coli. So there's already been a narrowing of the focus. That's where we're looking.
But if I understand
the
question,
and the issue varies spatially, depending where you are. That's the way I understand it, I think, you know, nitrogen would be in Upper Waikato, phosphate perhaps in the Waipa, And then-
sediment in the Waipara.
Well, via the sediment. And then a bit of both in the lower Waikato.
Yep.
But at Toki, say in the Hawke's Bay, you know, DairyNZ was trying to push everything onto phosphate. That's how I read it anyway, whereas nitrogen seems to be the issue with dairy conversion.
Yeah, so there's this issue around ecosystem health, and you're looking to protect, or not just ecosystem health, but also aesthetics and contact recreation and fisheries. Periphyte, the amount of algae growing in a river, is really important, and you want to maintain a certain level of periphyte and growth. Now that periphyte is going to be driven by flow regime, it's going to be driven by temperature and light and nutrients. But nitrogen and phosphorus, you will have situations where it's not necessarily always nitrogen limited or phosphorus limited or co-limited. You may be able to identify a particular limiting nutrient. So Lake Rotorua at the moment, for example, is quite strongly phosphorus limited in terms of the growth of the algae. That's because of the management actions that have been going on there. So the key question that I think we face, say, in the upper Waikato is it nitrogen, is it phosphorus that's controlling the amount of algal growth in those hydro lakes? Is it the retention time behind the dams that's generating that? Because the answer to those questions is then going to determine where you set the limits on, say, nitrogen loss in the catchment or phosphorus loss. And it's a fundamental science question that we are working on at the moment.
Doesn't it get confused though when we look at the end of the pipe, let's say down at Huntley, then you've got the two things combined. So you've allowed the nitrogen to increase in the upper Waikato.
And that's what David was alluding to in terms of you've got to think about, and Sue said right early on, is you're going to have to think about the effects all the way down to the river mouth in terms of managing for that. Under the NPS Freshwater.
That's right. Yeah. But the Regional Council has to think beyond the NPS Freshwater. I mean, for example, the Firth of Thames receives the nitrogen from the Hauraki rivers, Stewart lives. And that is an issue. That's going to need dealing with.
I guess just to comment, I focused on phosphorus, but that was not to neglect nitrogen at all. And you could almost make the same story with the Harbour Bosch process, that it was able to take atmospheric nitrogen and convert it into forms that could be used in agriculture.
And unlike Europe, which has got nitrogen awash with nitrogen, we're still at the stage where we could control it.
Backing you, the blue Danube is now the brown Danube, Jack.
But if the conversions happening in Taupo, and if we look at it on an economic sort of level, GDPs or whatever measure you want, Alison was referring to, if we were to try to mitigate the sort of the leaching that's going to happen, does that mean we have to forest all the dry stock farms to compensate?
That's what's happening in Taupo.
Are we picking winners in this argument, or can we all get a fair play?
You either get a fair play or you get you'll get a take later. Are you a farmer? No?
What happened in Taupo is willing seller, willing buyer. I mean, nobody had to plant trees. Right? Only people who wanted to sell their rights to farm.
I don't think we're going to get into end trading in the future.
Well, the modelling that's been done in the Upper Waikato so far, and that was done under a joint venture. Where you see a lot more conversions and maintaining levels of contaminants where they are at the moment. That did require some significant land use change, as well as significant change in all the existing farms. Those are modelling scenarios. So I think, Alison's already said, the more farms that come in, the harder it is for everyone to then meet a limit when that limit is set. So that argues for getting the limit set early and making sure the limit is set in a way that takes into account what it's going to cost the region.
I call it subsidisation actually, which is
Right. Yeah, we've all got our opinions.
Mike, just on that study, it's not clear in that study what the baseline was for the start before those, for that additional 22,000 hectares of conversion. What was the baseline?
I'm not aware of.
Well, that's pretty important, I would have thought, because is it from 2003, or is it after 50,000 hectares have already been done, or is it an additional 22,000 after those 50,000 hectares? From what I can see, and we asked MPI for this information, we denied it. But I would understand it was from probably a 2011 baseline if the study was done in 2012, which means that we've potentially the bottom line of 1,000 CFU, the 100 mil is going to be breached at Mangawhero. So basically there was going to be unswimmable conditions result from those extra conversions. In one of the scenarios, you guys will read it as well.
Well, it's available on the MFE website now.
So I'm asking you the question.
Yeah. And Graham Dole was the author of that report.
Yes, to me afterwards, because Mike wasn't involved in the technical aspects of it.
Okay. So just trying to get to the bottom of it.
But you academic, because this was a modelling study. Of more relevance, I think, is what will be the baseline that the plan change for the Waikato Waipa actually does. I mean, I've heard people argue for 2001, I think it was, when the regional policy statement actually came into being. So there are some people who say it should be quite some time ago, actually. Not just now, or not in 5 years' time when we finish it, but
I think that's all very interesting. But on costs of meeting some of these things, the only thing that I can think of that's available at the moment is again what was done in the Waikato River Independent Scoping Study, which looked at what would be the cost of meeting the vision and strategy. So they still exist, the vision and strategy still exist. So the exercise then, admittedly a scoping study, did the work on the cost.
4 billion, wasn't it? Right?
Something like that.
And we have...
Once it gets above 1 billion, I don't look at it.
And we actually have a kitty. There is a kitty of 200 million to try and achieve that vision and strategy. So don't think we're going to make it.
So who was going to bear that cost? Who was that cost going to be?
That 200 million is the government will pay that out.
The 4 billion.
The risk study didn't say.
Didn't say who paid.
But where would the cost be incurred from?
Doing stuff.
Doing stuff on farms, converting farms.
River engineering.
River riparian management. All the mitigation measures to improve the quality of the river.
Was it production or not?
Perhaps in some parts, I think, yes.
Yes.
Destocking.
Yes, destocking.
I'm interested in the third bullet point down there that says should not be required to absorb further degradation. And that is a comment about sometime in the future we're going to set some limits. And so I was like, as just a citizen, I'm like going, well, why would you wait sometime in the future? Isn't today the limit? And then Alison was talking about some headroom that was being used up by farmer spirit up the catchment as they started to develop more farms. And my question really is, maybe to Bryce, maybe we don't have any headroom. Maybe the headroom's already used up because of that third bullet point down. And shouldn't simply the Regional Council put in a rule that stops developments that will increase nutrient leaching until such time as current leachers have reduced their leaching to make some headroom?
Is that a question?
It's
it's a good statement. I think it's something that at this Healthy Rivers process and the collaborative stakeholder group, of which there's 1 or 2 members of that group here, are going to have to work their way through.
Yeah, g'day, James, but I'm actually one of those members for the dry stock sector. Land environment plans that we, in our industry, we're trying to get going and get engagement in and try to get on the front foot environmentally. And I was just thinking about all these farms that no one really knows how we're going to stop being sort of converted up in the top of the catchment. And what Mike is DairyNZ doing with regards to getting in with these guys and trying to sort out their milk sustainability plans or some sort of equivalent sort of well, a clean slate, but you know, like a new opportunity to design a farm basically.
Yeah, well, you're right. There's a lot new entrants can do, and under the Sustainable Dairying Water Accord, new conversions sort of required from day one to have those high standards. But if the issue is nitrogen, then you know, if you go from pine forest that leaches 3 or 6, somewhere around that levels, let's say 3 kilograms of E per hectare a year, to a dairy farm that leaches 35, you know, that's a big change. And so every hectare you're adding. I would expect that variation 6 and the water allocation rules that are in place, they provide constraints on further development, but the Regional Council tells us that there is still water available if it's moved around and used in the right way or traded. So in terms of the conversions, that argues for getting limits in place sooner rather than later, because you know, people make use of their land under the current rules. And people are allowed to make changes to their land and their land use so long as it's within the law.
For sure. I was sort of getting more towards the fact that it doesn't look like we're going to get any rules set for quite a while, and perhaps there's opportunities for organisations like DairyNZ to get in there and just say, hey, listen, before you design your effluent system or before you set your stocking rates or before you think about your whole farm, essentially, let's sit down and look at some best management practices.
Yeah, absolutely.
But James,
Yep.
Can I just add to that though? I mean, if we think about those conversions in the upper catchment, we're talking about a large proportion of those recent ones are going to be irrigated. So they're not going to be leaching 35 potentially with common typical practice. They'll be leaching more like 65 to 70.
Really?
So we're going from 4 to 70 on 25,000 hectares in the upper catchment, which pretty much amounts to about 1,000 tonnes of additional nitrogen to the upper river each year. So that's effectively cannibalising the lower river and the lower farmers, established farmers, emission rights, and the sheep and beef farmers. I don't know why the sheep and beef farmers aren't kicking up a stink about this.
Well, yeah, that's what I'm sort of trying to do in quite a different method. but you know, I'm not into it. But like this thing's been passed around the room so much tonight, but no one seems to be able to stop it. So you know, I'm just trying to.
We need some accountability.
What's that?
We need some accountability.
Yeah, sure. Do that.
My name is Tony Templer. I visited my old swimming hole. It would be 60 years ago now. And I didn't risk my life on the slime on the boulders or the green hair that was growing off a lot of these things. And just looking at the farms in the area, it's moved from dry stock to dairy with spotted regions.